The Belyando. It had been a long day. Not the mile so much, but the car wasn't all that quick, and the road hadn't been that good. We'd left Claremont, which held the status of a second hometown after a punishing farewell party. It had been organised by friends we'd made in the town, and mates from the relay gang, our stint with the Queensland Railways. We'd made a late start, having become once more unemployed. Heading for Charters Towers, the big old gold miner, the Belyando crossing is a bit short of halfway. It looked good in the thin, late afternoon winter sunlight. I took our 37 Chevy off the road and followed the river. We saw a little column of smoke ahead, so came to rest roughly halfway between road and camp. We jumped out, checking for level ground. Some small adjustment, and that was it. We fell into a familiar routine. Our habit was to sleep in the swags clear of the car. We also liked to eat, so a partial unpack was a necessity. Cooking and camping gear was set out, lighting to follow. A little nip of Ben Lee helped defy the cold. We got our swags organised and the fire going. The tea billy was located in a hot spot, and our cooker-billy, loaded with yesterday's stew, was positioned with care. The night had fallen swiftly. No stars or moon were evident. Beyond the fire, it seemed, was total blackness. Ken had wandered off and taken Toby with him. Toby was a border collie sheep, and a good one at that. Lately he'd come close to winning a diploma at his newfound job. He could do a plausible imitation of a Doberman guard dog. I was idly stirring the stew when suddenly I felt the instinctive, "Look out!" Something was not altogether right. I wondered about the whereabouts of the ready gun. This was an ancient Webley .455 revolver, donated by our mate Jim. Not exactly a target pistol, and somewhat devoid of any paperwork. We viewed it as a final premium on a life insurance policy. The gun had a home during the day and one at night. It was never used, but could be of great comfort on occasion. I casually looked around, but beyond the arc of light from the fire and the tilly lamp, I could see nothing. Somebody quite close at hand said, "Hello, the camp." There was a pause, then, "G'day, son." He came into view. He was in his early 60s, I judged, well covered in facial hair and careless of the latest fashions in working gear. Some injury had given his face a tyrannical leer. He could be, I thought, a gentleman to handle with caution. Sorry if I startled you, mate. Yeah, got a drink?" I seated him on one of our 5-gallon water drums and gave him a port. "Where's your mate?" "Out with the dog. Gives him a run every night." "Can't the bloody hound run himself?" "Yeah, but not after a feed. We've just fed him." "So what?" "Well, Toby's a car dog. You got to do things right. If you don't feed him on time, then exercise him, he'll bloody kill you in the car tomorrow." "I don't get it." "Well, we do. That's why my mate's taking him for a gallop tonight." Our visitor put a fire stick to his roll your own. Hey, you know where you are?" "I reckon we're on the Belyando." "Yeah. Where you from?" "Down south. Why?" "Once you cross the Belyando, you'll always return. Go south or north, east or west. Give you 10 years if you like. But you always come back. You'll die north of the river." "Fair income." "My oath. Tell you something else too. If you drink Belyando water, you'll never get crook. Got minerals in it." I heard Ken stumbling in the dark and talking to Toby. What's your name, Cobber?" "I answer to Mick." "Oh, right," I said as Ken appeared. "Ken, this is Mick. Mick, me mate Ken, and Toby." The men shook hands, and Toby, usually well-mannered, gave a bad-tempered grumble and lay down on the edge of the light. Mick didn't seem to notice that he'd been snubbed. Mick was just telling me that the water's got special minerals in it. They're good for you." "Probably a dead cow. That'd give it a bit of body." "Who's been doing all the digging, Mick?" I looked up. "What digging?" "Well, a bit of sandbank. We followed on the way in separates this part of the river from Anna Branch. There's holes dug right along it, some old, some quite new. Dozens of them. What's the story, Mick? He didn't deny that he was a culprit, but replied suddenly, "Oh, looking for something." "Found it?" "No, not yet. I will, but..." He spat in the fire and adjusted the worn-out coat around the shoulders. You got another drink?" I was starting to feel uneasy, but gave him another couple of ounces. "Had a partner once. Looked a bit like you," he said. "What's his name?" Mick looked at Ken. "You might ask a lot of bloody questions." He switched his gaze on me again. I realised that the couple of ports were only a nightcap. He'd been giving himself a pretty fair nudge before coming over. "I called him Bluey, but he answers to Lefty now. If he's still alive, the bastard." "Why Lefty?" "Only got one hand." "Accident?" Mongrel got between a man and his missus." He struggled with shaking hands to light the butt. "Me best bloody mate. And now I've lost me missus too, a bloody bitch." Ken and I exchanged glances. He indicated that he thought I'd gone quite far enough in the inquiry. I was beginning to think so too. This could be one of the can of worms best left undisturbed. Our visitor roused himself. He was trembling, and there was a nervous tic showing on his distorted face. He was reliving some dark, horrendous times in his life. He was a haunted man. Mick's voice grew louder as he became more and more excited. "I caught 'em. They thought I was stupid, see? We used to fish at night, me and Bluey. We'd take an old Caro light we had, and the light brings them up. Curious, just like you. We'd sit out with a bottle for comfort, about 2 in the morning or later. Then we'd set night lines and go back to camp. We were good, you know. We'd supply most of the pubs in the towers. Redfin, catfish and yellowbelly, eels, anything that swam." Mick waved his empty glass at me. Then Bluey started to get a guts ache. He'd come out and go back early, but he wouldn't come out at all. Too crook, he said. Jeez, he'd never been crook in his bloody life. Then me missus starts acting strange. I'd catch funny looks between them. One time she said, "Don't touch me there, I got a bruise." Shit, I hadn't given her a bloody bruise. She'd forgotten who'd done it. Then after tea she'd get all lovey-dovey. She'd say, "Hey, I made up your sandwich, darling, and the drinks are in the sack. I'll leave the billy on the edge so you can have a cuppa when you get back. There's a bite of cheese and a bit of corned beef in the safe." And she'd give me a kiss and wish me luck and all that. She'd tell me to catch a big one and how she wouldn't wait up, neither the beauty sleep. Some nights she was skittish, like an unbroke filly. That's what give her away. I took a while to tumble to it. Didn't want to believe it, I suppose. He stared at the fire. I saw a big tear slowly form in one eye and roll down his cheek. Both Ken and I would have liked to have been someplace else at the time. I couldn't help myself. "What happened, Mick?" "I left the camp one night, but and you went a couple of yards and came back. I laid down and watched them. They dossed early, and I was beginning to think I was mad when I seen me missus cross the fire and go into his tent. She didn't come out. I went off and bloody sobbed like a bloody kid. Then I thought, well, I'll fix that. Me mate and I never had a gun, so I got me axe off the wood heap and went to the tent. I could hear 'em carrying on, so I chucked a bit of fire in and Bluey tried to grab me. Got his wrist with the axe. Just about got his hand off in one swipe. Geez, he let out a bloody bellow. Too bloody quick for me, though. Slashed the back wall with his knife and took off. Me missus was all tangled up in the blankets and stuff, and what with the fire and Bluey taking off and his blood and that, she was getting a bit noisy. I soon shut that down, but bloody bitch wasn't fit to bloody live. I had a couple of rums and slept by the fire till dawn. Couldn't find old Bluey. Found his hand and chucked it in the river. Put me missus in the sandbank. Easy digging there. Now I can't bloody find her. Want to see her again. I got something to tell her. He lapsed into silence and stared at the fire. His gnarled fingers wrapped around the mug of tea Ken had silently given him. We listened to the sounds of the night until Carelessly, I supplied the last straw to the camel's back. Have you done time for this, Mick, or is this just in the family? His eyes blazed. I ducked as he threw the hot tea at me, and Ken fielded the enamel mug which followed. You bloody coppers, aren't you? Hey, bloody coppers. Man can't trust no one now. Well, I'll fix you bastards. He leapt to his feet, almost foaming at the mouth. He was shaking violently. He gave us a hate-filled glare. I'll bloody finish you both, and that's a bloody promise. The first reply was Toby, our sheepdog, turned Doberman, gave full-throated, teeth-bared snarl. He obviously felt that his first impression of Mick had been vindicated. As our friend disappeared into the darkness, a final message bounced off the trees. And your bloody dog too, I'll cut his bloody throat. Ken muttered a heartfelt, well, I'll be buggered, and helped himself to a Ben Lee. He looked at me thoughtfully. Has anybody ever suggested to you that you may ask too many bloody questions? No? Why? There was a long silence. Some coherent thoughts had to be collected and exchanged. The shouts and curses had receded into the distance, and the night was much better for it. Toby had settled down, relaxed but alert. Mick wouldn't get close with us without getting adequate warning. I threw the ball into play. What's the reckoning? Do we move out? Look, it's getting late. A lot of our gear's laying around. We've got a good fire. We're comfortable. He's given the hops a bit of a stir and he's not young. My guess is that he'll hit his swag and go out like a light. Besides, he knows there's two of us and we've got a dog. He's not that bloody mad, just a little upset. I thought this was a masterly understatement. Yeah, I agreed. You can't be buggered packing up, and I'm the same. Ken resumed. What we'll do is this, right? We'll have another snort, then turn in and we'll camp Kelly fashion. Give it 5 or 10 minutes. Then you go north, I'll go south, okay? You take the Webley. I'll have Toby. Once the Tilly's out, we'll be right. I didn't have any better ideas. We sat round the fire, which was slowly dying, had a final smoke, then made a big show of turning in. Our swags were not all that close to the fire, so once the lamp was doused, things were pretty dark. After a few minutes, I thought I heard Ken moving. So, like the bushrangers of old, grabbed my tarp and blanket and crawled away. I stood up after a few yards and cautiously north. I made about 50 yards from the camp and stumbled on a patch of young wattles growing densely. Pushing it a few feet, I got organised. Tarp down, blanket next, jacket over boots for a pillow, the Webley handy, and I composed myself for sleep. I grinned to myself in the dark. Not even Toby could find me here. Just at the moment, a very cold nose thrust itself into the back of my neck. It's remarkable how you can go on living although your heart has stopped beating. I punched Toby in the head and suggested silently that he go and play tricks on his master. A bit after dawn, and feeling a little chilly, I crawled out and cautiously surveyed the world. No mad axeman seemed available, so I gathered my stuff and made back to the car. Ken was attending to the fire. The billy was on, and eggs and bacon stood to one side, awaiting introduction to our old cast-iron fry pan. The day was coming up fine and sunny, and the smoke smelt of gum leaves. Life was sweet. How'd you sleep? Ken asked. Not good. I was going well with these dancing girls, but every time we got serious, this mad bastard would rush in and chop them into little pieces. They're not functional that way. You seen him at all? No, blast him. I picked a good camp right next to a meat ant mound. Didn't know till morning. The swag was full of them, giving me a right going over. And all I can do is scratch. We had a slow breakfast, packed up and left. There'd been no sign of life from the other camp. A tiny worm of doubt, well, just a maggot really, was beginning to squirm in my brain. We reached the towers about 11 or so. We were cashed up from Claremont, so there was no compulsion to look for work. We planned to hang out till we reached the coast. Could be more interesting. We brought a few provisions and some oil for the car, then got directions to the local lockup. Out to lunch, back at 1, was the handwritten sign. This one was not hard to solve. I bailed up the first local I saw. He was watering his lawn. Looking for a walloper, digger? Where should I try? The sergeant's a bachelor, always eats at Paris Caff. Right-hand side, next corner. Don't tell him I told you. Doesn't like being disturbed when he's feeding. Well, thanks, mate. And we drove on. Entering the cafe, he was easy to pick, even without the blue shirt and very dark strides. He was quite a big man in his late 50s, tanned and fit-looking, with a grey thatch. Well cropped, too. He sat alone. Ken shot a grin at the voluptuous Greek girl behind the counter. Orders taken at the table? She nodded and looked as if she'd take his orders anywhere at all. I tried hard to project waves of friendliness as we approached the table. Mind if we join you, Sergeant? He was too surprised to say no. A little social chit-chat followed, mostly concerned with our origins, the last job we held, our financial situations, ultimate destination, and how long we anticipated being around his beat. We were classed as itinerants and didn't rate very high in his pecking order. Not a patch on the lowliest woolshed worker, but a little better than a travelling salesman. The girl came to take our orders. It had to be steak and eggs, we were informed, as everything else was off. Whether she meant off, as being not available, or not healthy, I didn't find out. Anyway, the interruption gave me a chance to slip one in on the ruminating walloper. We camped last night on the Belyando crossing and met a character called Mick. He doesn't seem to call full quid. We're wondering if you knew about him. He stopped eating. Hey, Joe, come over here. The proprietor galloped across. These young blokes reckon they camped on the Belyando last night and met Mick, and bloody survived. God, they'd have to be bloody lucky, wouldn't they? Joe vigorously agreed. You were there all night? You camping near Mick? Yep, he seemed a little unsettled. We wondered about him a bit. Unsettled? The sergeant growled. You could call it that. I know Mick like a brother, don't I, Joe? I put him before the court when it happened. Murder it was. 1, nearly 2. And we don't know how many since. It's been a few years now. And I was only a 2-striper then, but I remember every bloody detail. I'll tell you what happened out there. Finished with what had looked like a double serve of lunch, he sat back and began stoking up a formidable-looking pipe. See, they were camped out there together. Mick, his missus, and his best mate, Bluey. There was a bit of hanky-panky going on, and Mick woke up to it. We waited till I was cuddled up in Bluey's tent, and he lit a branch of dead gum, plenty of leaves on it, and pushed it into the tent. When his mate tried to get out, he chopped his hand off with a flaming axe. He's a bit savage, is our Mick. He's got a real good sense of humour, hasn't he, Joe? Another match to the pipe and a few careful puffs. The policeman was clearly enjoying this opportunity to relate the incident to a fresh audience. Bluey took to the bush, but Bill caught his missus still in bed and just about dismantled her. A right bloody mess it was. He spent the night with a bottle of overproof on the fire and planted his old woman in the sand in the morning. He never caught up with Bluey, which was just as well. Bluey was picked up by the mailman on I think it was Towers Road in the morning. Yeah, more dead than bloody alive. Loss of blood and shock and all that. I'd agitate the system, I suppose. But one moment, you see, you're in the middle of a naughty, and the next some bastard sets fire to your tent and cuts your hand off. Then he carves up your best friend and starts rushing around looking for you with a bloody axe. Don't encourage a full night's sleep. We agreed that he could have a point. We went out and got Mick. He was pretty quiet by the time we reached him. We had no idea what to expect from Bluey. Then we went out next day and got his missus. The coroner said his clerk and a shorthand Sheila, and a medico to pronounce her dead. I took a couple of lads to do the digging and attend the barbie and that, and had a bloody good day, really. We brung Mrs. Mick back. That's where it went wrong, see? See, she wasn't looking her best, and the medico thought I'd put old Mick round the bend if he'd seen her, And there was plenty who could bloody identify her. So we just got father to say a few words and then put her down. Then, of course, the inquest, and that was funny as a bloody wake. The coroner wanted to view the site. So we don't have an axe murderer, every day. And this one reached the Brisbane dailies. So out we go again, this time with Mick. Trouble was, Mick got his wires crossed. He reckoned that he wanted to show us, where he planted her, Yeah, we tried to tell him that we'd been out and taken her back to the hospital morgue, but he wouldn't listen. He showed everybody the burnt tent. And when he when he laid down, when he was watching them, and where he found Bluey's hand, and then he took us to where he'd planted her. She wasn't home. We tried to explain, but he just switched off. He dug and dug and dug, calling her name and cursing her. Finally, we had to handcuff him and bring him back by force. Jesus, he fought. Kept wailing, about how she was out there and he had to bring her back. Bit sad, But no, it was a bit bloody sad, but... So he's, he's out and about, though? Yeah, guilty but insane, they reckon. He went in for a few years. Then they let him out. Said he was harmless. Been back on the river 2 or 3 years. Keeps digging, digging holes, trying to find her. Yep. Well, other than that, is he harmless? What do you reckon, Joe, eh? The sergeant grinned like a tiger shark. Dunno, said the Greek. There's been a lot of story. He's a bad cant there. This Mick, he's a bad man. He don't fear man or God or sergeant, He added as an afterthought. This being the clincher, if he didn't fear the big walloper, then obviously he was really mad. Joe crossed himself and looked suitably devout. The pipe was alight once again. Yeah, that's right. See, boys, every so often we get a missing persons dodger. There's been more than a few when they run out of trail at Emerald or Claremont. Brisbane thinks they've gone through here unnoticed and gone into Townsville or Cairns. They think they've either gone to ground or come to grief on the coast. But there's plenty who think they've camped on the river and met old Mick. They haven't had a decent drought on a low river for about 5 years. It'll come. Yeah, that'll tell us a few things. He got to his feet. Can't prove nothing, makes you think, but you blokes were bloody lucky, I reckon. You could have just vanished. And I'm as sure of that as me name's O'Toole. He looked at us each in turn. Yeah, you blokes moving on, eh? We nodded. Good. Well, it's back to work. Put that to slate, Connie, love. The Greek girl waved her tea towel at him. We paid up and departed, deep in thought. On the eastern outskirts of Charters Towers on the road to Townsville, there was a little pub, the last watering hole leaving town. On an impulse, I said, hey, let's have a beer. Oh, a bit early. Never too early. Just late from the day before. It was an old joke between us. I had something on my mind. We went in and found 2 other patrons. The barman was not all that busy, so we got comfortable with a pot each, and there was a saucer of peanuts on the counter. We're travelling through, I announced. Camped last night on the Belyando. The barman hooted. This your first stop, boys, hey? How'd you meet Mad Mick, did you, hey? I thought we might have. What's the story? Yeah, who'd he murder this bloody time, eh? His 2 brothers, half a Yank platoon, his mum and dad? Or was it his wife and kids, eh? Or just his best mate? Ken was looking somewhat puzzled as I told the barman that it was his wife who copped out and his mate had won a short arm. The barman cackled. Did you stay the night, though? Like, all night? The other 2 blokes were gurgling like a busy drain. When I said that we'd stayed on, even after Mick had put on his turn, one said that he'd take odds we hadn't slept much. His mate thought this was pretty witty stuff. The barman lined up another round. On the house. I reckon you've earned it. He hooted with laughter. You know what the old bastard used to do last year? See, there's a road coach comes through from Claremont Rail Head, the Charters. That's twice a week. And they pick up the rail to the coast. Now, Mick thought he'd liven them up a bit. The times were pretty regular. He'd tie a loincloth on and smear himself with mud. Of course, he's tan, like a bloody native. Anyway, so the mud made him look real dinkum. He made up a couple of spears too. Soon as he heard the bus coming, he'd dance on the road. He'd rattle his spears and prance around. Ochre marks on his face, bone in the hair, the lot. Black as the ace of spades and twice as fearsome. The passengers would all be southerners, see, and the driver would slow down to give Mick a fair go. Bloody hysterical, they reckon. The wallopers told him to knock it off, just knock it off, they said. Somebody throw a fit? Fit? No, funnier than that. Mick went into his routine one day, going great guns. He was prancing alongside the bus and the driver was down to first, making out it was a stiff climb after the bridge. They used to prime passengers a bit about, lost tribe and this old bloke defending his country and that, Really laid it on. Of course, the Mexicans would lap it up and the locals wouldn't give the game away. The joke was too bloody good to spoil. They love old Mick. Anyway, Mick was outdoing himself, going real well. Then his bloody loincloth fell off. He hadn't blackened that bit, and it was flowery white, and he was stark bloody naked, looking like a catfish fillet in a couple of burnt bits of bloody toast. The driver nearly put the brakes off the road, and the passengers had hysterics. All except for a couple of old chooks who reckoned their daughter's morals were affronted. They'd be bloody glued to the windows on the way back. Anyway, they laid a complaint, and O'Toole had to act on it. One of the barflies said, "Tell him about the road jab." Another pot all round, and the barman set off again. Yeah. That was a couple of years ago or more. Mick got a bit of a broom handle and some planks and carved out a real good gun. Sort of like machine gun, Big magazine on top and kind of stand underneath it, Bit like an old Bren. Looked the job all right. If you're 50 yards away. He's not stupid as Mick. Then he got a photo out of some book and made himself a uniform. He dyed it with tea juice and wattlebark tannin for brown and green from some plant or other. He made up a little cap and got some glasses and knocked the lenses out so as you could see. He had it all worked out. It was cars this time. There's more of them than bloody buses. He'd perched near the little knob on the bend this side of the bridge. See, he'd be on the passenger side in view for about, 10 seconds. Of course, not everyone would see him, but a lot would. Soon as he'd seen the brakes light go on, he'd beat it. See what happened would be the passenger just sort of idly gazing around, and he'd suddenly focus on this real live Jap in tattered uniform, training a bloody great machine gun on him. He'd scream at the driver, then they'd have a fight about what he'd seen and that. Sometimes the driver would back up, of course. There was no gun and no jab. Wouldn't sort of help to pass the time in the towers, but anyway, but Mick must be a real pain in the arse to the sergeant. The barman chuckled. Hell no. Pat O'Toole's known him for years. He's out at Mick's camp for every second weekend for a bit of fishing and a few drinks. He extracted some coins from our little pile on the bar and filled our glasses. Pat played along with the joke, see? When some breathless tourist fronted him, it explained that they thought the Jap was an old escapee from Cowra, and about half the available military were trying to track him down. He had to tell Mick to give it away in the finish, though. Oh, what happened this time? Well, some of the young bucks on the coast got sucked in. They wanted to go out hunting the Jap with pig rifles. They were organising a manhunt. Pat had to tell them to knock it off before it got out of hand. Then he'd tell Mick to behave himself for a while. Ken said, listen, has Mick ever killed anyone? Mick? Harmless as a Jersey house cow, old Mick. Funny bastard, but... Ken dismounted from his stool. Seems to me there's... Yeah, I reckon I'm right. Seems to me that's the trouble with the towers. There's a couple of too many funny bastards around. I winked at the barman. He can't see the joke. Mick had him camped on a bloody ant bed last night, and he hasn't stopped scratching since. We went out through the bat wings to the car.